we're going to hear some music while you're coming up. Okay, is everybody ready? I have a question for you. A silly question, okay? Is everybody looking forward to Christmas? No? Somebody said no. I don't know who that was. I think most everybody is looking forward to Christmas. So I'm going to tell you a Christmas story this morning that happened 57 years ago. That's a long time. It was the year 1958, and I think Kyle has some pictures he's going to put up so we can see what things looked like during our story. And I haven't seen the pictures that Wesley's daddy fixed for us for the story, so I'm going to be surprised too when you see them, okay? 1958, and I don't know if anybody else has ever heard this story before except for the girl who told it to me, but it was so long ago that I don't think she would mind if I shared it with you. So, first of all, I wonder if someone can tell me what the very first commandment is of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Someone said it. Good for you. That's the very first one. That means that we should obey God, doesn't it? And what about the 5th commandment? Does anyone know what that one says? The 5th commandment says, honor or obey your father and mother. So both of these commandments are about obeying, right? Obey God first and obey your parents second. And I think all of you know that Christmas song about what? Being good for goodness sake, because what's going to happen? Santa Claus is coming to town, right? And even though that's just kind of a pretend story, isn't it? Or a pretend song, it's still about being good and about obeying. So my Christmas story is about 2 girls named Elizabeth and Jane. Look at those 2 girls. I think that's a 1958 picture. 2 girls named Elizabeth and Jane who kind of forgot about obeying God and obeying their parents and being good for goodness sake at Christmas time. Now, Elizabeth and her parents and brothers and sisters were all crowded into a tiny little 2-bedroom house while their bigger house was being painted and wallpapered and repaired so they could move into it. But at least the older brothers were away at academy, so most of the time wasn't quite as crowded as it might have been otherwise. And while the family was living in the tiny house, Elizabeth became friends with Jane, who lived very close in the house next door. Now, Jane's family always had only a little small Christmas tree, and I don't think they ever sang any Christmas songs and didn't have very many Christmas decorations. But worst of all, the kids in the family always got only 1 or 2 presents, because Jane's parents didn't believe in Christmas very much, or at least not the gift-giving part of Christmas. But Elizabeth's parents, and especially Elizabeth's dad, just loved Christmas. So as soon as the Christmas season began, out came the decorations, up went the Christmas tree, and Mom began baking. Look at the 1958 picture of Christmas. And always, always, there was Christmas music playing on the radio or the record player. So because of all the Christmas fun that was going on at Elizabeth's house, Jane spent as much time as possible as she could next door. Now, one evening, Elizabeth's parents said they needed to go out and finish their Christmas shopping. They were going to take the 2 younger sisters with them, and the big sister was at a school program. So they told Elizabeth that because their houses were so close together, they had talked to Jane's parents, and they had all agreed that if the girls promised to keep the doors locked, they could stay home alone. Now, Elizabeth had just turned 10 years old, and Jane was 11 and a half. So they were pretty excited about staying home alone. So they put some Christmas music on the record player, and they played with their paper dolls, and picked out all the things that they wanted from the Sears Christmas catalog. But after a while, they began getting a little bored. And what happens when you start getting bored? You look around for something to do, don't you? Sometimes you start getting naughty. Did you hear that? I think she knows what's going to happen. But because Jane loved Elizabeth's Christmas tree and the bright lights so much, she started examining them more closely and looking at all the gifts underneath the tree and reading all the names on the packages. And I think she might have been a little jealous because she knew there weren't going to be that many Christmas gifts underneath her tree. So Jane asked Elizabeth if she thought all of her family's Christmas presents were wrapped yet. And Elizabeth answered her and told her she was pretty sure there were still some presents in her parents' bedroom closet and underneath the bed that weren't wrapped yet. Now remember, this was a small house, so they didn't have very many places to hide gifts. So Elizabeth knew where they were. But Elizabeth quickly told Jane that her parents had told her sisters not to go into the bedroom. But Jane was so curious that she kept telling Elizabeth that it probably would be okay if they just opened the closet door to see if there was anything in there and bend down and look underneath the bed just to check for boxes. They weren't really going to touch anything or look at anything. She just wanted to see how many were in there. And what do you think happened? Jane finally convinced Elizabeth that it would be okay just to look. What do you think about that? Do you think it was okay to go in the bedroom and just look if they didn't touch and didn't look inside? I don't think so. I don't think so. Because I think that was the beginning of not obeying and not being good for goodness sake, right? Do you think it was? Just like Hannah said, they might get into trouble, huh? So the girls quietly, you always do things quietly when you know it's something you shouldn't be doing, don't you? The girls quietly went into the bedroom, then they bent down and peeked under the corner of the bedspread. And what do you think they found? They found a large, kind of flat box, and it wasn't wrapped yet, just like Elizabeth had thought. But it didn't matter if it was wrapped or not, because on the sides of the box was a picture of a bright red wagon. So now they knew what the younger girls were getting for Christmas, and this was getting pretty exciting. Now, have you ever done anything you shouldn't do, but it's so exciting that you just don't seem to be able to stop? You would never do that, would you? Well, that's what happened to Elizabeth and Jane. They were so excited that the next thing Jane did was open the closet door. And right there on the shelf in front of them was a whole set of Bible story books, just like that. Well, now they knew another gift. And Elizabeth knew the books would be for all of them, so it wasn't only for her little sisters, but she knew her gift as well. And do you think now when the girls saw the Bible story books that maybe it was time for them to close the closet door and go back and play with their paper dolls?
I think it was time for them to do that, but I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay. I think it was time for them to close the door, and I think their consciences were getting pretty guilty because somebody was trying to remind them to obey. And that would have been a good time just to slam that closet door and get out of there, wouldn't it? But did the girls do that? No. By now, Jane was so excited she couldn't stand to think of closing the door and not knowing what was in the 2 big bags that were sitting on the floor inside the closet. So before Elizabeth even had time to stop her, Jane grabbed one of the big bags and pulled it open. And guess what she saw inside? A beautiful gray wool Sabbath coat with a red plaid scarf that matched the inside lining of the coat. Well, of course, she had to know she had to know who it was for, so she put her hand down inside the bag and twisted the coat around, and then they could see what the tag size said, and they knew it was for Elizabeth's older sister. By now, Elizabeth was getting a little worried that her parents might be coming home soon. So she asked Jane to close the door. But Jane said, "There's only one more bag in here, so let's just look really quick." So Jane put her hand down inside the bag again, and if they thought the first coat was beautiful, inside the second bag was another coat. One Elizabeth thought was even more beautiful. The second coat was a soft turquoise color. It was kind of a nubby wool fabric with beautiful buttons. But oh, the best part was a big collar on the coat. And it had fur trimming all around the edge. And if you wanted to, it had snaps, and you could just unsnap that collar and take it right off. So Jane twisted that coat around so they could see what size it was. At size 10, just Elizabeth's size. And really quick, Elizabeth had a vision of herself wearing that beautiful coat. Now the girls were really, really excited. But they were also getting a little worried that Elizabeth's parents really would be coming home soon. So Jane quickly pushed the coats back into the bags just as they were before and closed the closet door. The girls quickly went out into the living room and sat on the sofa. They were trying to pretend like nothing had ever happened and they hadn't done anything wrong. Then suddenly, Jane decided she was tired and she thought it was time to go home and go to bed. I think she really just didn't want to be there when Elizabeth's parents got home. Do you think so? So Elizabeth decided that was a good idea, and she decided to go to bed too and pretend like she was asleep so she wouldn't have to talk to her parents when they got home. So for the next 3 days until Christmas, Jane didn't come over very much to Elizabeth's house. And Elizabeth tried really hard to act normal and pretend that nothing had ever happened. And she was trying really, really hard to be good to make up for what she had done. And if her parents knew about what the girls had done, they never mentioned anything to her or asked her about it. And then it was Christmas morning. The two big brothers were home from academy, and in that tiny house, it didn't take long for the little sisters to wake everyone up so they could all crowd into the living room around the Christmas tree. Dad plugged in the Christmas tree lights, and guess what was sitting right in front of the Christmas tree? A big red wagon. It was all put together now, with a set of Bible storybooks sitting right inside of it. The little sisters were very excited, and Elizabeth pretended to be excited. But it was really hard because, of course, she already knew about the wagon, didn't she? And about the books. And she didn't really feel like sitting in the wagon when the little sisters asked her if she wanted a turn. But she smiled and sat in it anyway so Dad could take her picture. The dad and the big brothers started handing out all of the other gifts. But there were 2 boxes behind the tree that Mom told them to save until the very last. And I'm pretty sure Elizabeth knew what was inside of those big boxes. Don't you think so? Finally, one of the big boxes was given to Elizabeth and one to her older sister. The older sister ripped her package open and started squealing and laughing because she, of course, didn't know about the coat, and she was very excited. So Elizabeth tried to copy her, and she even got caught up in the excitement because the coats really were quite beautiful, and the girls were excited about wearing them to church next Sabbath. But somehow, even though all of Elizabeth's friends also thought the coat was beautiful, it was never quite as wonderful to wear as it would have been if it had been a surprise and she didn't have a guilty conscience. And it certainly would have been more fun to wear if she had not disobeyed her parents and peeked at the Christmas gifts. And she was reminded of that every time she wore the coat. And then, after she had outgrown the beautiful turquoise coat, she had to wear the gray wool coat that her older sister had had. So that was a long time to be reminded of how she had disobeyed and how she had spoiled Christmas. That was a hard lesson to learn, wasn't it? Elizabeth still never told her parents what she and Jane had done. And if her parents knew about it, they must have thought she had been punished enough by having her Christmas spoiled and having to wear those 2 coats, because they never mentioned it to Elizabeth either. So now, after all these long years, she still thinks about that Christmas sometimes. But, Elizabeth said, she certainly learned her lesson and asked Jesus to forgive her, and she has never, ever been tempted to peek at Christmas presents again.